Professor Namyong Lee's column, Long, A Nation That Produces No Scam Victims, a nation where fraudsters have no place to hide. A scam is an organized crime of deception in which criminals exploit trust and human psychology through phone calls, text messages, messengers, social media, advertisements, investment solicitations, or romantic emotions in order to steal authentication information or induce money transfers, ultimately taking financial assets and control over accounts. Voice phishing, messenger phishing, investment fraud, and romance scams differ in method, but their essence is identical. They destabilize vulnerable individuals, paralyze judgment, redirect the flow of money, and seize control over accounts. Because South Korea has strong digital infrastructure, payments and transfers are fast, and when that very speed is abused to the advantage of criminals, damage escalates rapidly. I reject approaches that reduce this problem to individual carelessness. Scams represent a national risk that simultaneously undermines public safety, financial security, and digital trust. According to data from the National Police Agency, voice phishing losses amounted to approximately KRW 447.2 billion in 2023, and then surged to about KRW 854.5 billion in 2024. In 2025, by July alone, there were 14,707 reported cases with losses totaling KRW 776.6 billion, and by the time year-end approaches, annual losses are expected to have exceeded KRW 1 trillion. Scam crime must no longer be treated as an everyday nuisance crime, but recognized as a structural failure in national governance. Accordingly, both national behavioral standards and institutional design must be changed simultaneously. I begin by dissecting the structure of scams that have evolved into cognitive warfare. Scams do not start with technology but with psychological manipulation, and they can be defined as a form of cognitive warfare. Fraudsters inject urgency to eliminate time for reflection, impersonate authority to suppress doubt, and impose secrecy to block verification by family or acquaintances. When these three elements converge, even normally rational individuals make irrational decisions. In particular, impersonation of public institutions instills fear such as, your account is involved in a crime, prompting immediate transfers, while investment scams stimulate greed with promises of principal protection and guaranteed returns, inducing repeated transfers. Romance scams first establish emotional bonds, causing victims to lower their own defenses. Therefore, the starting point of scam prevention must be enabling the public to automatically recognize these psychological warfare patterns. This is not a phenomenon unique to one country, but a global industrial-scale crime. In the United States, reported consumer fraud losses exceeded USD 12.5 billion in 2024, while internet crime reporting statistics indicate losses surpassing USD 16 billion that same year. In the United Kingdom, authorized push payment fraud involving induced transfers is reported at an annual scale equivalent to hundreds of billions of won, with case counts reaching into the hundreds of thousands. In Singapore, scam losses in 2024 were announced to be at least SGD 1.1 billion, with more than 50,000 cases recorded. Although the scale differs, the pattern is identical everywhere. Consequently, solutions converge in the same direction. The conclusion of global best practice is clear. Do not merely tell victims to be careful. Design systems that block scams first. Simple awareness campaigns do not last, and criminals learn from publicity to become more sophisticated. Therefore, financial institutions must halt suspicious transactions more rapidly, platforms must block scam accounts and advertisements faster, and investigative authorities must more tightly integrate payment freezes and tracking. National standard behavior must be incorporated as well. When systems intervene, the moment citizens stop and verify, the success rate of criminals collapses structurally. The most alarming features of South Korea's recent damage trends are resurgence and escalation in loss size. After losses appeared to decline to several hundred billion won in 2023, the jump to KRW 854.5 billion in 2024 suggests that criminal organizations upgraded their methods and broke through existing defenses once again. In 2025, data showing several hundred billion won in losses accumulating within just the first half of the year have further heightened concern. In such surge phases, the same common elements always appear: remote control apps, malicious links, fake customer centers, impersonation of institutions, and the simultaneous strengthening of mule accounts and money laundering. A single moment of inattention can trigger cascading transfers and massive losses. Age distribution also does not follow stereotypes. While scams were once perceived as primarily targeting the elderly, recent data analyses show high proportions simultaneously among those under their 20s and those in their 60s. This indicates that the belief being digitally savvy means being safe is dangerous. Younger people are exposed to investment, recruitment, loan, second-hand trading, and crypto-related scams, while older adults are more vulnerable to impersonation of institutions and family members. Vulnerability arises not merely from lack of knowledge but from psychological moments, situational pressure, and isolation from social networks. Therefore, prevention cannot rely on education alone. It must solidify into everyday behavioral rules. Those rules must be fixed in their simplest possible form. To reduce harm, the way statistics are used must also change. Instead of focusing only on incident counts and total losses, management must emphasize operational indicators such as the rate of payment freezes within the golden time, recovery rates of stolen funds, incidents of secondary damage after account takeover, and the number of mule accounts blocked. Operational metrics clarify institutional responsibility and allow measurement of improvement. If South Korea is a digital powerhouse, scam response must also be managed as a digital operating system. A virtuous cycle must be created in which systems are adjusted through numbers and numbers are reduced through systems. The core of prevention lies in the simplicity of public behavior. National standard actions can be defined as follows. First, if someone urges immediate action, stop and verify. Second, if money or authentication is demanded, disconnect and reconfirm by phone. Third, if link clicks or app installations are requested, block immediately and prepare to report. These three sentences apply regardless of age, occupation, or technical skill. Above all, what scammers hate most are stopping and reconfirmation. Scammers feed on speed and isolation, and phone verification breaks isolation and cuts speed. One principle deserves special emphasis. Public institutions and financial institutions never instruct people to transfer money by phone. Banks never force customers to install external apps for security reasons. Phrases such as principal guaranteed, guaranteed returns, safe account, or transfer for investigative cooperation cannot exist in legitimate procedures. Yet scams destroy this common sense using the tool of urgency. Therefore, the way to protect common sense must itself be common sense. I do not demand complex security knowledge from citizens. I demand one action. That one action is the habit of verifying by phone. Messenger phishing imitates the tone of family and acquaintances, while romance scams cloud judgment through emotional bonding. Verifying by message keeps the victim inside the scammer's conversational arena. Verifying by phone changes the stage and removes the victim from the psychological environment designed by the criminal. I say that 20 seconds on a phone call is the cheapest insurance for protecting citizens' assets. When this simple habit spreads nationwide, success rates fall and the criminal industry structure begins to collapse. When damage occurs, the flow of money and control over accounts must be cut within 30 minutes. The greatest enemies at the moment of victimization are self-blame and silence. If victims hide out of shame, money is fragmented and flows faster, accounts are penetrated more deeply, and secondary damage begins in chains. I define the recovery golden time as 30 minutes. Within that window, payment freezes, reporting, evidence preservation, and account recovery must proceed simultaneously to maximize the possibility of recovery. If the order changes or delays occur, the success rate of tracking and refunds drops sharply. Therefore, victim response is not a matter of will, but of procedure. The first step is to stop transfers and payments through financial institutions. Whether it is account transfer or card payment, the flow must be halted before more money moves. At the same time, reporting via emergency services opens the case processing track, and relevant counseling channels should be used to receive procedural guidance. Next, evidence must be collected in a single folder. Transfer records, counterpart accounts, call logs, text and messenger conversations, URLs, traces of app installations, and screenshots become decisive later in disputes and investigations. Finally, account security must be restored immediately. Account recovery covers a wider scope than expected. Email passwords must be changed first, financial app passwords and authentication methods reset, and other services using the same passwords checked as well. If remote control or malicious apps are suspected, device inspection or even initialization should be considered, and services linked to telecom providers must also be reviewed. I do not tell victims to do everything perfectly. I tell them to immediately cut only two things: the flow of money and control over accounts. Even that alone reduces losses and increases recovery prospects. The direction of institutional reform converges on no-fault protection, platform responsibility, and international cooperation. Even if public behavior guidelines are strong, criminals win again if institutions are slow. I propose 4 keywords for reform. The first is speed. Anomaly detection and payment freezes must operate in minutes. The second is responsibility. Financial institutions and platforms must abandon the attitude of "we are merely intermediaries" and bear institutional obligations for prevention. The third is blocking. The supply chains of mule accounts and mule phones must be eradicated at the root. The fourth is recovery. Victim support and legal aid must be standardized and made universally accessible. International trends, particularly in transfer-based fraud, are moving toward reducing victim blame and strengthening industry responsibility. In the United Kingdom, institutional shifts have strengthened refund obligations for transfer scams, encouraging greater preventive investment by the financial sector. Singapore has concentrated anti-scam capabilities, publicly disclosing recovery and preemptive blocking outcomes, and combining strict punishment with prevention. In the United States, rising losses have strengthened consumer protection warnings and expanded discussions on the responsibilities of platforms and payment networks. South Korea must not fall behind this direction. The credibility of a digital powerhouse is determined by its capacity to respond to fraud. Finally, international cooperation must be strengthened. Scam organizations launder money by combining mule accounts, virtual assets, overseas transfers, and offshore call centers across borders. Even strong domestic investigations struggle to recover funds once they leave the country. Therefore, standards for suspicious information sharing among investigative authorities, financial regulators, platforms, and exchanges must be established, enabling immediate freezing and tracking through international channels. This must be elevated to a core task of national digital trust infrastructure. A strong nation is one that supports its citizens even in moments of weakness. From an FEA perspective, scam response constitutes integrated governance of public safety, financial protection, and digital trust. Scam response is not a campaign of a single ministry, but a matter of integrating national functions. Public safety operates through reporting and investigation, financial protection through payment freezes and refunds, and digital trust through platform blocking and account security. When these functions operate separately, victims are forced to shuttle between institutions, repeating the same explanations while money disappears. I regard this fragmentation as South Korea's greatest weakness. Therefore, stakeholder roles and responsibilities must be redefined through a relational framework, connecting citizens, financial institutions, platforms, telecom providers, investigative agencies, central and local governments through a single protocol. Citizens are the actors who stop and reconfirm, and systems must intervene at that moment. Financial institutions must detect anomalous transactions, activate delay mechanisms, and strengthen face-to-face verification for vulnerable groups. Platforms must rapidly detect and block scam advertisements, impersonation accounts, fake customer centers, and fake investment communities. Investigative agencies must standardize intake and payment freeze linkage, simplifying even the list and submission of required materials. Local governments and educational institutions must regularize scam education to the level of traffic safety education so that it becomes habitual. I emphasize the actionable conclusion once again. When someone says right now, stop and verify. When money or authentication is demanded, disconnect and reconfirm by phone. If already victimized, do not hide. Immediately freeze payments and report. When these three lines become national habits, scammers lose speed and isolation, and the criminal industry itself begins to collapse. There is no reason for a digital powerhouse like South Korea to remain vulnerable to digital fraud. Now is the time to standardize national behavior and align finance, platforms, and investigations in the same direction. Citizens must act first. Do not rely on banks or the police alone. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's column, Long.